Welcome to XE3 Visual Live Bindings, using bind sources and adapters. My name is Jim Tierney, and I'm a developer at Embarcadero Technologies. I'm one of the developers who worked on live bindings for XE2 and XE3. I've recorded about 35 minutes of demos using many different live bindings features, but focusing on T-prototype bind source and other components to connect to non-database data. One of the uses for the prototype bind source component is to generate data for prototyping. In this demo, I'll show how to use prototype bind source to generate sample data and discuss some of the important component properties of prototype bind source. I'll right-click on the prototype bind source component and choose the Add Field command. The Add Field dialog box has two columns in a list. The left column is the name of the generators. Each generator generates a set of sample values that are unique. For example, if we choose integers, we're choosing a generator that generates a set of signed integer values. Or if we choose uintegers, we're choosing a generator that generates a set of unsigned integer values. The column on the right is the data type that will be generated. We can generate unsigned integers as an integer type, as a floating point type, as a string type, or as a unsigned integer type. At the bottom of the dialog, we can see samples of the data generated by the selected generator, and we can use this button to select the next value. At the top of the dialog is a place for the field name. Also, there are two checkboxes, one for shuffle values and repeat values, which I'll talk about later in the demo. The list supports multiple selection, so I can create multiple fields at once. I'll choose alpha colors and color names. Alpha colors are the type of color that is supported by FireMonkey. If I was creating a VCL application, I would choose colors instead. In the Live Bindings Designer, you can see the prototype bind source with the two new fields. A grid control can be used to show the values generated by the prototype bind source. One way to create a grid control is to right-click on this member in the type bind source. So here we see our numeric color value and our color name. Before I discuss some of the prototype bind source properties, I'm going to add a link to display the number of rows in the prototype bind source. The number of rows will be displayed in this label, and I'm going to use a tBindLink component. tBindLink is one of the binding components that's not created by the Live Bindings Designer. So I'll right-click on the bindings list and choose New Live Binding Component. Specify the label and the bind source as the control and source components. And then I'll go into the expression editor and add a format expression. Label, we'll use the expression text to access the text of the label. And for the source expression, I'll use the format method in the expression engine. And I'll reference the item count and item index properties of the prototype bind source. So if we evaluate the source expression, we're going to get something like that, 0 of 200. So now the prototype bind source has 200 records, which is the default. We can change the number of records by changing the record count property. And you can see that this label has been updated. We can also change something about the fields. The shuffle option controls the order of the generated items. So if we want to generate the items in ascending order, we can choose to turn off shuffle. If we want to generate a set of unique values, we can turn off repeat. Here the label is indicating 141 rows. That is because there's 141 unique color values provided by these generators. How you use the shuffle and repeat properties depends on how you're going to use the data. For example, this configuration is good for a lookup list. So I'll go ahead and show how to set up a lookup list using the prototype bind source. Let's rename this to prototype bind source lookup. And we'll get rid of our grid. And we'll have another prototype bind source that will represent our data. So for this prototype bind source, we'll add a field, alpha colors. We'll leave shuffle values and repeat values turned on because this field is going to simulate some data in our application that's not ordered. We're going to use this label to show the number of records in our prototype bind source 1 rather than in our lookup data source. So I'll click on this link and I'll go ahead and change the data source component to prototype bind source 1. And then we'll add a field to display our data. Choose edit. And then we'll use a list box to display the values. So we want to fill a list box with some color names, but the data is actually the color value, so we'll link the color value to the lookup data. So now we have a lookup list. We'll add a navigator to our data source, and we can also put on a rectangle that's going to actually display the current value as a color. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this application. Oh, I forgot something because our list box isn't showing the selected value. Let me go back here. It means I forgot to connect the selected value in the list box to our data. So you can see in the designer, dark green is selected. Let's run it again. So you can see that we're displaying the color value here, and then the associated color name here. We can change values here to affect the color. So, in summary, we're using two prototype bind sources. One for the data that we're editing, and it has a color value in it, and another prototype bind source for a lookup table that's used to populate our list box. Let's take a good look at the LiveBindings designer to see the entire design. I'll try to arrange things. So you can see we have the edit connected to our data color value, the rectangle connected to our data color value, the list box selected value is connected to our data color value. So these are all the controls that are connected to the data. We also have the navigator connected to this, our data source. And then the list box is being filled with our lookup table. So the color is the lookup data, and the color name is the display data. Okay, I'll close this project. And restore our layout to get ready for the next example. The prototype bind source can be used to create an intermediate field. An intermediate field is one that is used for the sole purpose of creating a link. For example, a T-edit can't be linked directly to a T-track bar, but can be linked if there is a field between the T-edit and the track bar. So let me show you what I mean. In the LiveBindings designer, if I try to connect these two controls, the red indicates that they can't be linked. So now I'll drop a T prototype bind source and add a field. I'm going to add a single field without a generator, because I know that the track bar in FireMonkey uses a floating point value. And I'll set the record count to 1. I only need one row of fields. And now I'll connect the track bar and the edit to that field. All right, I'll go ahead and run this application. And now the track bar and the edit are linked. Let's click on the line connecting the edit to the field, and we'll see that we have a T-link control to field component. So as the name says, this component is for linking a control to a field. We also have a T-link control to field component for this line. T-link control to field is one of the components that the LiveBindings designer can create. If we click on the bindings list and choose the new LiveBindings component, we can see the list of all the quick binding components here. These are the components that the LiveBindings designer can create. So here we have our control to field control to property, property to field, but there is no link control to control. Note that there also is no link property to property. So, for example, if I have two labels, I also cannot link them using the LiveBindings designer. However, I can create an intermediate field. In this case, I'll just create a string field, and I'll set the record count to 1. And now I can link these two label controls through the field. Note that both the labels are blanked out because there's the default value because the default value for the field is blank. We can actually give the field a value and now we can see that the value is shown in the form. Now, if we want the labels to be updated at runtime, what we need to do is set this field value, and that will cause changes to flow through these links to the labels. Let's put a timer on the form and implement the event. So what we'll do is update the field every time the timer ticks. So the prototype bind source is a lot like a T dataset. So what we do is put it into edit mode, find the field 1, and set the value. In this case, we're just setting it to the current time. So let's go ahead and run this application. And we can see that the labels are updated on every timer tick. And this T-track bar continues to work. I'll select a link, and we can see that the T-link property to field component was created. We can sort of customize what is displayed in the labels by using this custom format property. So I'll select both links, multi-select, and type in something. %s will be substituted with the value from field 1. So using this expression, we're concatenating a string, the time is, with the string from field 1. If field 1 was not a string, we would have to use something like this. Which will also work for a string. So let's run our application. Okay, I'll close this project. Prototype bind source can be used to bind to user-defined objects. Let's create a new VCL application. And I'll open a unit that I've already created that has a user-defined object. The object is called TContact, and it just has first name and last name properties and two constructors. Properties are read-write. Here's a method to load up a generic T-list with contacts. Here's the parameterless constructor and a constructor that has parameters. The parameterless constructor is the one that will be called automatically by LiveBindings when it tries to insert a record into a list of TContact. This constructor is the one that we use to load the sample data here. All right, we'll go ahead and add this unit to our project. And use the unit in our forum. All right, now we'll drop a prototype bind source. And we'll link this to a grid. There's no data at this point. And then we'll implement this event on create adapter. And here we have a var parameter, which is the adapter that we're going to create in this event handler. T-list bind source adapter is a component. The first parameter is the owner, and the second parameter is going to be the list of contacts. So this line of code is going to create a new T-list bind source adapter and pass the contacts list that we loaded in this method. It created a TObject list. TObject list is used because this type of generic list will free all of the contacts when it's freed. There's an optional parameter in create, which is a owns object. It defaults to true, so we don't have to worry about freeing the list of contacts, because the T-list bind source adapter will automatically free the list when it is destroyed. Okay, we'll go ahead and run this application. And we can see that the grid is populated with the list of contacts. I can link to a grid control without specifying individual field names, but in order to link to other controls, I need field names. The LiveBindings designer doesn't show field names for TContact because the TContact type is not created until we run the application. I can use the tPrototype bind source to simulate TContact by adding fields. Now I can link these fields to controls. All that is required is that these design time field names match the property names in the TContact class. At runtime, properties of TContact will be used in place of the fields in TPrototype bind source. When I insert into the contacts list, the parameter list constructor is called to create a new TContact object. All right, I'll close this project. Internally, the TPrototype bind source uses two other components, the TAdapter bind source and the TDataGenerator adapter. So these two components can be used instead of TPrototype bind source. Just like TPrototype bind source, there is an onCreate adapter property in the TAdapter bind source. But the TAdapter bind source also has an adapter property. When we assign the adapter property with the TDataGenerator adapter, we've created the equivalent of TPrototype bind source. To add fields, we use the TDataGenerator adapter just as we use the TPrototype bind source. However, for this example, instead of generating fields, I'm going to use a custom adapter class. The custom adapter class encapsulates a user-defined class. I've created a package called Contacts Adapter Package, and in this package we have our user-defined type TContact. It has a couple of properties and a couple of constructors. In this package we also have a simple adapter class derived from TList bind source adapter. And all this class does is set a list of contacts. This unit registers our custom component TContacts adapter. It also registers TContacts adapter 2, which I'll talk about in a minute. I'll go ahead and install this package. And you can see that it's registered 2 components. Now I'll drop the contacts adapter component on our form. I'll get rid of the data generator adapter and select our contacts adapter. And here we see the first name and last name fields. Now I'll bind these members to some controls. And I'll run the application. Oops. I'll choose the application and run the application. And so here we see the data from our contacts adapter. Now let's look at the contacts adapter 2 component that I mentioned earlier. Here's the contacts adapter 2, and it's the same as the other contacts adapter, except I published properties. So here are all the events and some other properties that we would want to see in the object inspector. Let's go back to our form and drop TContacts adapter 2. And we can see in the object inspector that we have some published properties that we can change for contacts adapter at design time, and also various events that we can set. One thing you'll notice is that the contacts adapter component is not displayed in the LiveBindings designer. This is because the settings for the LiveBindings designer are not quite correct. So I'm going to show you how to fix that. Choose Tools Options and click on LiveBindings. This page has the options to control which components show in the LiveBindings designer. And we'll add TBindSource adapter, which is a base class of our custom adapters. And so now we can see that our adapter component shows in the designer. Thank you for watching this presentation on Visual LiveBindings. To learn more about Visual LiveBindings, Malcolm Grove's blog has some very informative posts about bind sources. The Embarcadero doc wiki has a lot of information on LiveBindings and continues to be updated with additional information. On my blog, I have posts on a variety of LiveBindings topics.
Is it possible to connect variables to custom component properties using prototype bind source?
You can, fields, sure. Yeah, it'll work with public fields.
Okay. If there are any more questions, feel free to put them in now. We've got a few more minutes. And I'm not sure if this is a follow-up or not. It seems like half a question. It says, so no direct property-to-property binding possible. Right.
So not with the quick binding. I mean, if you wanted to use managed bindings that we delivered in XE2, that's an alternative to doing property-to-property binding, and it's a different style. But if you wanted to do, as I showed in the demo, you can do a sort of simulate a property-to-property binding by using an intermediate field. And when I say, let me clarify that, property-to-property, there's no property-to-property bindings that don't, or properties that don't accept user input. So the text property of an edit can be bound to another property. So you can bind edit to a label text property or caption property in VCL. You can do that. But you have two properties that are not changed by user input, like two label caption properties or two label text properties for FireMonkey, then you can't bind them except through an intermediate field using the quick binding component.
Okay. Could the T-contacts adapter approach be used to build a MVVM application as Malcolm Groves showed us?
Yeah, I think so. I think you mean you're referring to putting it into a package and having the component be available on the palette. That's just one more step in the use of custom adapter component.
Can we download the code that you had, especially the BPL that exposes the adapter?
Sure. I'll put a sample up on SourceForge, and I'll probably do a blog post.
And blog about it. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Sounds good. Using this technique, does it entirely remove the need to have the observable make custom components?
Yeah, I think the observers. I think you're talking about the observers that we implement in the controls to, notify LiveBindings of changes to the controls made by the user. And so you need the observers on controls like TEdit that accept user input, and those, that drives the notifications that cause the data to flow from the control to the data source. If you're linking to like in my example where you're just linking two labels together or some other non-editable kind of properties through an intermediate field, then there are no observers involved in that. In that case, the data source is sending notifications. So in LiveBindings, there's really two sources of notifications in the quick bindings thing. One is the control, and the other is the data source. So you need something. One of those two things needs to be involved in order to cause anything to happen.
Okay. When you're talking about adapters, T-adapter bind source and T-data generator adapter, what are they adapting to and from? What is it adapting to? And
yeah, well, so the adapter bind source is, it's a thing that has an adapter. I mean, it has a reference to an adapter. So there's only one of those. That's one kind of bind source. You know, we have other bind sources, like we have a bind source for DB, bind source for DBX, prototype bind source. But it can hook up to multiple different kinds of adapters. So the data generator adapter is one to generate, you know, sample fields, prototype data, and then you have the TList bind source adapter and the TObject bind source adapter. Those are the two other ones. They're not components, but you can create them at runtime. And then if you want to make additional components, you can, like I did, you know, that are on the palette, you can derive from those. So there's really only 3 adapters that we ship with in XE3, just the data generator adapter, TList bind source adapter, and TObject bind source adapter. But somebody might want to implement other adapters to expose whatever. I mean, you could have an adapter that was sit on top of an XML file, or an adapter that, you know, hooked up to cloud services or whatever. And the idea is that, you know, you just drop this adapter in and you set some settings, some, you know, connection information or something, and then you would be able to use it in LiveBindings at design time and at runtime. So, you know, we'll probably see more adapters in the future, but it's more of a right now. It's the pieces are in place to extend the kind of data that you want to support just by implementing new adapters.
Do you think this new technique announces the decline of T-client dataset following the trend, the new NoSQL way, for reasons of being faster, more flexible, etc.?
I don't think there's. Let's see. No, I don't think it announces the decline of T-client dataset or other in-memory databases, because they have lots of capabilities, like sorting, things like that. So it depends on, you know, the style you prefer. I mean, sometimes the data is not available in a client data set, and you don't really want to load it into a client data set in order to consume that data. I mean, that's sort of what you had to do before. And so this is just a way, you know, to develop your application without having to go through, you know, turning everything into a data set, which is what you had to do with the VCL DB control, DB work control.
Yep. Bill.